Okay, we're up to Gimel on page Lamed Aleph. The Yesod that you're about to learn is a secret that people don't know, and it's something that could be enormously helpful in a person dealing with their growth in Kedushas Haguf. There are a lot of things we use our bodies for, and as young men, we tend to struggle with the taiva aspect of the body. But the truth is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to focus on inyanim of ruchnius, and what ends up happening is that we know that we have to worry about our Kedushas Haguf, but we don't think about it except in matters of ishus. There we, when it comes to women or things like that, then we focus on it, Kedusha, and so on, Shmiras HaBris, and so on and so forth. But, there's also another function of the body, and that's called eating. You ever heard of it? It's called eating, and it's a massive obsession that the world has. Okay? Only need to go to any Jewish neighborhood and walk down the main street of that neighborhood and see all the various eating establishments, lemineihem, and look at the prices and the amount of time, effort, energy, and the recipes and all the Jewish magazines and so on and so forth, to see that we're a little obsessed with food, aren't we? We're a little obsessed with food. And it's not just that, even physically, like I've tried to work on it at various times. It's not something I've been working on straight, but at different times I've tried to work on it. Like I one time sat by the Shabbos table and challenged myself to not take any food that's not in front of me. There's different things on the table. I'm just going to take what's in front. I don't need to eat every single salad on the table. I do, but I shouldn't. So, and before I turned around, I didn't even realize. I was like, "Could you pass that?" I was like, "Oh," I said I wasn't going to do that. I didn't tell the people by the table. So I want to learn with you this paragraph, which talks about the relationship that we have with food, and then I want to end off. If we have a few minutes before Ma'ariv, I want to end off with what we should do about that practically, because to say that we're going to stop being into food like that is not going to happen. But first I want to point out how relevant it is to working on oneself. It's not just that it's another area, it's the doorway to deal with the area that everyone struggles with. It is the doorway to deal with it. People don't realize that. Okay? But I'll show it to you. Okay. Moron HaChazanish Nishmasa Eiden Kosa Behanhagos. The Chazanish wrote in his list of Hanhagos, he wrote the following. He wrote Zahir that a person should be careful, me'oid. A person should be very wary, me'achilas tainug, from eating just out of enjoyment. Ve'im betumas haguf, yesh rishon l'tuma, v'yesh av hatuma, v'yesh avi avos. If we find in the halachas, in the Chumash Vayikra, in the halachas of Tumah, that there's avi avos hatuma, the tumas meis, there's Avatuma, there's Rishon L'Tuma. He says in Midos there's also Avi Avois Hatuma and Avatuma and Rishon L'Tuma. B'Tumas HaNefesh Shel Miloi HaTaiva, when it comes to the Tumas HaNefesh of fulfilling one's desires, Ba'achilas Tainug Misached Rishon L'Tuma Ve'av Hatuma Ve'avi Avois Hatuma. When a person eats just for indulging, okay, that not for keeping himself healthy, not for any other reason, just he shovels it in, just achilas tainug. He's bringing together all the forms of tumah of the nefesh. Let's let him talk a little bit more to understand that. Davar zemin hashvelim ma'od. This is a very lowly thing. Ma'akvim esalimud. It holds back learning. So the fact that sometimes we see that B'nai Torah, I was giving Musar in the yeshiva a few weeks ago about sleeping. I was telling the boys in a high school that they must start sleeping more if they want to be successful in their learning. Okay, I know the Rosh Hashiva doesn't give that exact message, but that was my message. Okay, maybe he gives the opposite message, could be, but each of us has our role. And I was telling the boys that you're not going to understand your learning, remember your learning, or be healthy if you don't sleep. But it was like the Yeshiva Shechevra, and I knew what they were thinking. They were thinking that the Gedolim don't sleep, right? They stay up whole nights learning. And they all want to be like the Gedolim. So I told them as soon as they start eating like the Gedolim, they could start sleeping like the Gedolim. Because yeshiva guys could sleep 2 hours a night, but they know the menu in every restaurant Baal Peh. Right? There's a stira there. You see that? There's an inconsistency. Interesting. Ma'akvim es halimud, being too indulgent in eating, ukeda amru b'medrash, like it says in the medrash, v'huva b'taisus ksubas tafkuf dalet. The Gemara says, ad she'adam mispalel sheyikansu divrei Torah l'soich gufay. Before a person davens that divrei Torah should come into his body, yispalel shelo yikansu ma'adanim l'soich gufay. He should daven that delicacies do not enter his body. V'amru begitin su'udascha shahana oscha heimena, a suda that you're getting hana from, mishaych yodcha heimena. Pull your hands away from it. This is what the Chazon Ish wrote. Okay? Says the Mashgiach, Zuhi avoida rabba umakifa. This is not a simple avoida. If you think I'm sitting here saying, don't eat gishmak food, you are missing the boat. This is a mesechta. This is an entire world of our relationship with a certain part of what our body desires. It's rabba umakifa. It's big and it's makif. Lehiskadesh b'maychel u'mishteh. To be miskadesh when it comes to eating and drinking. V'hinei HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'tuvay. Hashem was so good to us. Nosan tam v'hano. He gave taste and pleasure. B'chol pri, in every fruit, u'b'chol yerek, in every vegetable, u'b'chol masha adam oichel v'shoisen, in everything that a person eats and drinks. You just see the Kedusha of Revolva. He's like, fruits have delicious taste, vegetables have delicious taste. I'm sure that's what you were thinking about also when he was talking about delicacies, right? The Kosav HaChavos HaLevavos, the Chavos HaLevavos writes, Shazui haschar ba'ad masha adam mekayim es gufa al yedei achilosei kertzayna yizbarach. HaKadosh Baruch Hu rewards you for being healthy, that there's good taste in the food. It's a schar from Hashem for eating healthy food. Ach, im adam oichel rak kedei leihanos. If the entire reason a person is eating is just to indulge, hu hoifech es hahanoa letachlis. He makes the pleasure the point. We never do that. It's okay at a certain level for us to enjoy food. It's not okay for that to be the reason we eat. That's, at least in this madrega. That's Tumah. And how incredible are the words of the Chazon Ish. This is the deliciousness of this sefer. He says, I checked with some of the Talmidim of the Chazon Ish. I looked into this terminology that the Chazon Ish says, V'sha'alti, and I asked them, Ma bir dvarav hastumim b'zeh. What is the Chazon Ish mean? He was talking about Echad l'tumah, Rishon l'tumah, Ava tumah. What was the Chazon Ish referring to? I'm going to write what I think the Chazon Ish meant. Maybe this is not so far from his kavanah. Rishain l'tumah hu tumas oichlin umashkim. The rishain l'tumah is eating and drinking. When a person indulges in food, not for health, not for sustenance, not because it's a mitzvah, but just because his body wants to shovel in as much pleasure as possible. That's called a rishain l'tumah. May avos hatuma hanoige meleinu lemaisa lezehiros im kiloi lehilchas avos hatuma mamishi tumas hazera. The tumah that we relate to when we talk about tumah that you find in the halachas of tumah is the tumah of shechva zera, is tumas keri. V'romaz lanu b'mesek l'shaynai. The Chazon Ish was hinting to us with the sweetness of his language in his subtle way Ki achilo l'shem hana, that when a person indulges in eating just to enjoy, goyreres achareo haitzah zera levatola. It pulls after it being moitzi zera levatola. Nobody talks about this. One issue brings on the other. The chaye ishos l'shem hana, and it also brings when a person is married, that his interaction, his intimate interaction with his wife, is not to do chesed with her, is not to make her happy, but is just for himself to indulge, which is a very selfish relationship. Shehem dvarim chamurim pikam, which is much more serious than eating l'shem tainug, right? But that's the avatuma. Umevia derech ra'azu lemisa ruchnis mamish. It brings to a spiritual death, tumas meis. It ultimately brings to a spiritual death, which he calls tumas meis, shehu avi avois hatuma. V'nimtza shekol shloishes dargois hatuma. It comes out that each one of these three madregas of tuma, kvar klulois b'masha oda margil atzmei lecha l'shem taiva. They're included in this, that a person accustoms himself to eat just for the purpose of enjoyment. Shebozehu hayres kedushas gufay. With this, he destroys the kedusha of his guf. Now let me explain what's going on here and how this fits into our lives, because chas v'shalom, for us to make a choice to jump too much on a madrega will just lead to a bad effect and destruction. So when we learn something like this, which is a little bit up above our pay grade, it's important for us to understand the lesson that we're learning from this. You know, in the Mishnayos, the Masechta Nazir comes before Masechta Saita. Now, Masechta Nazir is about using drink properly. Right? The Nazir is Yazer Atzmei Min Hayayin. The Saita is about Nichshalim in Arayas. Okay? So it's Oichel and Arayas. It's interesting that in the Torah, it's the other way around. In the Torah, first you have the parsha of Saita, and then you have the parsha of Nazir. Reb Tzadok HaKohen Melublin asks, why is it that in the Torah it's first Saita and then Nazir, and in the Mishnah it's first Nazir and then Saita? Good kasha. Says Reb Tzadok, if a person will be nichshal in eating for the wrong reasons, or in being involved in intimacy or intimacy-related things for the wrong reasons, which is worse? Certainly the intimacy things are worse, because that touches our kedusha, the kedusha of our ichos, and so on and so forth. And therefore in the Torah it says first Saita, which is the really serious thing, and then it goes down to Madrega and it says Nazir. But Torah Shabal Peh is not setting up the Seder HaMadregos. That's Mitzad Hashem, that's Torah Shabiksav. Torah Shabal Peh is setting up, that's us. Torah Shabal Peh is us, right? The Torah Shabal Peh is the Seder of Avodah, the way to work on it. Says Reb Tzadok, a person wants to work on Shmiras HaBris. Again, people don't know this. A person wants to work on Shmiras HaBris. You know, a lot of times the Yetzer Hara loves when we talk about things like Shmiras HaBris and Kedusha and this and that, all these things. And, you know, it's spicy. The Yetzer Hara loves when we talk about that stuff. But you know what a person can do that wants to work on that? Don't work on it. Try the best you can. Don't focus on it so much, which might be good advice in general. Don't focus on other healthy things. Try to fill your life with important and healthy things. You want to grow in Kedusha? Work on your eating habits. Work on understanding eating as part of my Avodas Hashem. Work on, and the place that I think the Malacha starts, La'aniyos Daiti, I think it starts with overeating. Because for us to say to eat only to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I don't think that that's the starting point for us. For us to not eat because we think food is delicious, even though the Mashgiach writes it, I don't think that that's the starting point for us either. But not to make ourselves sick because we're such Balei Taiva. That's something that I think is in our wheelhouse to work on. I think about this, I've spoken about it in Shir a little bit before Yontif. We have, even Shabbos we have this, we have an insane idea of food. We sit down on Yontif. Do you ever realize how much food we put on the table on a Yontif? It's not really normal for human beings to be eating that much food. It's not normal. It's an enormous amount of food, okay? How many people after a meal on Yontif are just like an overstuffed cow? You just can't move. Then we're tired and can't learn. And why are we eating so much? It's pure. Don't tell me that it's because of the Ein Simcha Ela B'Basar V'Yayin. Please don't even try that on me. Okay? The Ein Simcha Ela B'Basar V'Yayin, you can have a half a glass of Geschmacka wine and a few pieces of delicious, delicious meat and be Mekayim B'Hidr. B'Hidr Mahadrin Min HaMahadrin. Ein Simcha Ela B'Basar V'Yayin. The reason we eat our heads off on Yontif is because we can't restrain ourselves. That is the reason. Because we don't know how to tell our stomachs no. And if you want to grow in Avodas Hashem and in Kedusha, instead of working on all this salacious stuff that the Yetzer Hara loves that we work on, why don't we work on something that's a safe, helpful, meaningful growth in Avodas Hashem? I eat when I'm hungry. And when I'm not hungry anymore, I know this sounds crazy, I stop eating. And if a person could teach himself to do that, besides the fact that he'll probably live an extra few years, but it's an unbelievable step forward in a person's aliyah in his avodas Hashem to be able to say it's okay. And there's another area, okay? I always get nervous before I say this next thing because I tell myself it's the type of thing that people do but nobody admits to doing and nobody's proud of doing. Like even overeating on Yontif, that for some reason guys will admit to each other. But you know what we don't admit to other people? So I'm a little embarrassed. I hope maybe I'm talking to a group of guys that would never do such a thing. Is when we get mad at people for eating the food that we thought that we should eat. Ouch, like on Hanukkah when you came home and someone ate the last donut, or you wanted to eat something, siblings, it's amazing how many fights siblings have about this stuff, like, oh, I wanted that, and nothing looks as good as when it's on someone else's plate also, you didn't think of it before, but now that he mentions it, now that it's on his plate, it looks really good. We get like emotionally involved in our eating. We really do. We get emotionally involved. I always, for years, I've been talking about this, like going to a wedding. First of all, I've noticed that people show up more on time to fancy weddings. You're not sure if I'm right. I am right. You'll notice. When it's a very fancy wedding, everyone's on time because the food is going to be awesome. This is going to be a shmorg. It's going to be awesome. Okay? People take shmorgs very seriously. People starve themselves for 2 days before. Okay? If it's going to be, depending on which hall it's going to be in, you kind of know if there's going to be kugel and some indecipherable meat, by the chassan-tish, or if there's going to be some spread where by the time you get to the main dish, you will have already eaten several main dishes. Okay? And it's always amazing to watch the interaction between people by a smorgasbord. It's amazing, amazing to watch. Okay? One of my favorite moments by a shmorg is when one person stops and goes, "Where did you get that?" Right? It's always it's like a heated moment, Maybe I'm going to miss something. I'm trying to strategize here, That's why I'm not putting salad on my plate. It takes up room from the other very, very important things. Okay? I always wondered, I can't say I ever did this, but I always wondered what would happen if we would come to a wedding full. Go out to eat before a wedding, fill yourself up. Walk into the shmorg, you're mamish not, you can't even think about eating. Then you just watch everyone. Probably, unfortunately, it's probably true. It's probably true. But you get to watch people walking around their plate, mapping out the terrain. Someone comes over to you, it's like Mazel Tov, Mazel Tov, Mazel Tov. But it's hard to lose focus. We once had in the shul many years ago, we have like a big kiddush on Simchas Torah in the middle of Hakafis, which is during the day. Nowadays, I made it into a whole thing. It's like part of Hakafis. We have a whole kumsitz then. It's very, very nice. We sing songs. It's beautiful. But back in the day, there was one time that there was a balabas in the shul that decided he's sponsoring amazing Simchas Torah kiddush for the Olam. So he sponsored this elaborate kiddush for the first time in Waterbury. It had already been in the five towns for a few years, but for the first time, Waterbury was exposed to this thing called meat boards, which they didn't know existed. A lot of people in Waterbury, and it's so amazing. You know, have you ever been by kiddushes where they like announce like the kids shouldn't sit down before the adults do, because the kids are all chopping seats. You know, the kids will go to like the nash table and they're like stuffing their cups or plates with all kinds of nash, and the parents are so disapproving of it. These kids filling their plates with nash. It was so interesting to watch the fathers deal with the meat boards. Okay, it was not any different. You know, like they say, the only difference between men and boys is the price of their toys. You know, like it was like the only difference between men and boys was like the type of food that they were lohut after. I made a commitment to myself that I'm never having meat boards by Simchas Torah again. It took away from the Simchas HaTorah. When it says ein basar ella, ein simcha ella b'basar v'yayin, it doesn't mean ein simcha ella. It doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean there shouldn't be any other simcha. Okay, but we get lost. We get lost in food. We get lost. And that would be something for us to work on, that we can build our gaiva to Kedusha. We build our sense of ourselves. We don't let ourselves get lost. Somebody took the last piece by the shmorg of the tongue that you wanted to taste. It's okay. It's okay. You know, it's interesting. My wife's Rebbitzin used to always tell the girls that there's no pleasure in yesterday's steak today. That's what she always used to tell them. And when my wife told that to me, at a certain point I was like, I'm not sure that's true. Have you seen people sit down and discuss yesterday's steak? I'm not sure that. I think she was such a heilige woman, Aleh Shalom, that she thought that people only enjoy food when they're eating it. They didn't realize that the leftovers is talking about it after. You know, like the conversation, the iyun achila, the iyun shiurim about food, like that type of thing. I know there are people that have hobbies with food. I'm not sure what to say about that, because sometimes it can be a positive thing to have a hobby and to be into food and to understand. And there are guys. I have several of my children are very good cooks, and I appreciate the skill that they have and the understanding that they have of food. One of my kids could taste something that my wife made and tell her every ingredient. I don't know how she does that. It's a thing, right? You can be like, oh, you use this, you use that. It's a skill. I don't look at it the same way as this. It's a skill. Some people like to paint. Some people are into music and they can hear every instrument. And some people have the umness of food. It's different than being lahut after food. Like, I can't eat something simple. I can't. It's too simple. Me? It's too simple for me. I only eat like high-end food, or this like blindness that we have when it comes to food. This is something really to think about, and in many ways you can keep this in mind. In many, many ways, like this type of like being able to be just more chilled out about food. Like, it's okay. It's okay. So it's not exactly the way I like it. It's okay. Like, to be able to do that.
A lot of times, like, our mothers or go to Shabbat Shabbos, they make a ton of food and they expect you to eat it. And like, your mother will like, no, you better take seconds. Every single mother is expected to take seconds. It's hard about Yahweh if you don't take seconds. Like,
no, you have to learn how to do it. You have to learn how to do it. You have to learn first how to eat slowly. Your mother just wants to see you eating. She wants the pleasure of seeing her son eating. So eat slowly. You don't have to eat all the food. And instead, we're used to, I think it's a yeshiva bachar thing, even just because of our schedule. Nobody eats faster than we do. Okay? When you get married, you're going to be in a spell. You're going to be like, okay, I'm done, I'm ready for dessert. Your wife's going to be like, I'm just getting started here. Okay? We take care of, seconds is before a lot of people picked up their forks. So my first advice to you is to do that. And you teach your mother. You teach her, like, I'm full, I'm sorry, I'll have some later. I'm full now. I'm full. I'm satisfied. It was delicious. I enjoyed every bite. I'm full now. Anyway, but first let's do it ourselves. We'll worry about our mothers after. We have to get the kayach to do it ourselves.